My name is Claire Holt. I'm 28 years old and a captain in the United States Army. That night, the wind was screaming at 60 miles per hour, ripping street signs off their posts on Cedarwood Lane. But the thing that turned my blood to ice wasn't the storm. It was the sound of a deadbolt sliding into place behind me. I was standing barefoot in the freezing mud, my t-shirt soaked and clinging to my skin like a second layer of grief. Through the window, I watched my stepfather, Warren, calmly crack open a lukewarm beer. Right beside him, my own mother reached up and yanked the curtains shut. She closed the blinds on the house my father built. She chose to lock her own daughter out in a hurricane to protect a parasite. They thought I would scream. They thought I would beg for a key. They were wrong. Before I show you how I burned their world down, hit like, subscribe, and let me know where you're listening from. I read every comment. Now, let me tell you why the blade from your own family always cuts the deepest. 15 minutes earlier, the air inside the house tasted like stale grease and cowardice. I sat at the kitchen table, my back as straight as a structural beam. It was a habit from the academy that Warren hated. He liked people slouched. He liked them small. Across from me, he was shoveling instant mashed potatoes into his mouth, flannel sleeves rolled up, forearms gray with the grime of a job site he probably hadn't visited in weeks. He didn't look up. In this house, silence was his favorite weapon. The weather map on the small wall TV was a bruised smear of red and purple. The storm was making landfall. I set my fork down. It hit the plate with a sharp, clinical ring. $83,400, I said. My voice was a flat, even line. My father's life insurance. 20 years of service. The money meant for me. Where is it, Warren? The room went dead.
He took his time.
He licked a smear of butter off his thumb, leaned back, cracked open a beer. The sound of the aluminum tab felt like a gunshot in that tiny kitchen. You've got a lot of nerve, Claire. His voice was thick with unearned authority. He pointed a greasy finger at the walls around us. That money kept this roof over your head while you were off playing soldier. It kept the lights on. You don't get to come back here after years in the sand and start auditing the books. It was my father's money. My pulse stayed at 60 beats per minute.
Combat breeding.
In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. It was his final gift. You used it to pay off your gambling debts and buy that truck sitting in the driveway. You stole from a dead man. Warren's face turned a mottled shade of red. He slammed his palm on the table and stood up, using his bulk to shadow me. I looked at my mother. I waited for her to say something. To look up. To be the woman who used to tuck me in and tell me the world was a fair place. She pushed her chair back, stood up with her head down, walked to the front door, and began unlooping the heavy iron chain. Warren jabbed a thumb toward the porch.
Out.
When you learn to show some respect, maybe we'll let you back in for breakfast. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I walked toward the door. As I passed my mother, I caught the scent of her lavender soap. The same smell from my childhood. It felt like a betrayal in every nostril. She was trembling, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She was choosing the monster who stole my inheritance over the daughter who had bled for her country. The moment I stepped onto the porch, the wind hit me like a physical wall. I heard the door slam. I heard the deadbolt slide. The heavy iron chain rattled into place. I stood there. My toes sank into the black mud. My thin t-shirt was soaked within seconds. The cold was a dull ache, but the rage inside me was a white-hot coal. I turned and looked at the wooden fence bordering the property. Under the rain, the cheap white paint Warren had slapped on years ago was beginning to peel and wash away in long, ugly strips. Underneath it, a deep, dark shade began to emerge. Harbor blue. It was the color my father had picked. The color he had painted with his own hands before he died. Warren had tried to erase him. He had tried to whitewash our entire history. But the storm was doing what I should have done years ago. It was stripping away the lies. I stared at that sliver of blue wood, and 16 years of memories came flooding back like a broken levee. It happened exactly 14 months after we buried Nathan Holt. My father was an electrician. He worked with his hands until the skin was thick as glove leather. But those hands always felt warm when they ruffled my hair. His garage was his sanctuary. Machine oil. Cedar sawdust.
Carpet white.
A place of order and purpose. Then Warren pulled into our lives in a rusted flatbed truck, and the air turned sour. He didn't ask for permission. He just walked into that garage, kicked my father's organized bins aside, and cracked open a 5-gallon bucket of cheap white exterior paint. I watched from the doorway, my heart thumping like a trapped bird. One stroke. The harbor blue was gone, smothered under chalky white death. He wasn't fixing the house. He was performing an execution. He was erasing the man who built this home, 1 square foot at a time. The purge didn't stop at the fence. Roy moved through our hallway like a conqueror. He took down the photos, my dad holding me at the county fair their wedding day. He didn't box them. He tossed them into trash bags like old coffee grounds. Then came my bedroom, the room that caught the full morning sun. Warren decided he needed a space for his so-called business ventures. He moved my bed to the dark, damp corner of the basement and filled my old sanctuary with rusted wrenches and oil-stained rags. He even ripped the landline out of the wall. Said the bill was too high. The truth was uglier. That phone was my only line to my grandmother, Vivian.
He wanted me isolated.
He wanted me to forget there was a world where someone actually gave a damn about our family name. I tried to fight back once. I stood at the top of the stairs while Warren hauled my father's favorite armchair out to the curb. My mother appeared beside me, but she didn't put her arm around my shoulder. She just shoved a glass of cold milk into my hand. Don't make a scene, Claire. Her eyes were fixed on the carpet. Warren is just trying to do what's best for the family. He's the one providing for us now. Just drink your milk and go downstairs. Her cowardice was a slow-acting poison. Every time she handed me something to keep me quiet, I felt another part of my love for her shrivel up. I learned to be a ghost. I spent my nights in the basement, curled in the back corner of an old oak wardrobe that still held the faint, fading scent of my father's work jacket. That's where I kept it. The only thing Warren had never managed to find. The pocket watch. Heavy silver. The glass face was cracked from the day my father fell, but the internal gears were stubborn. I'd pull it out of the dark, grip the winding stem between my fingers.
Click.
The sound was
Click.
sharp and dry.
Click.
It was the only sound in that house that Warren Lester didn't own. I pressed the cold metal against my ear.
Steady.
Rhythmic. A drumbeat.
A march.
832 days. That's how long until I turned 18. That's how many days I had to survive before I could sign enlistment papers and disappear into the army. I wasn't just waiting. I was training. I know some of you listening right now have been there. That suffocating weight of being silenced in your own home by someone who didn't belong there. If you've ever had to count the days until you were finally free, hit that like button and drop a 1 in the comments. Let me know I'm not the only one who had to fight just to keep their own name. The house tasted different when Warren wasn't in it. He'd taken his truck to a dive bar a few miles out, probably looking for a poker game he could afford to lose with my father's money. I stood in the hallway, back straight, eyes scanning. I wasn't a daughter coming home for a visit. I was an operative in a hostile environment. I reached the door to what used to be my bedroom. Cheap brass deadbolt. Warren thought it would keep the world out. He was wrong. They teach you at Fort Lewis how to break things. How to enter places where you aren't invited. I pulled a thin metal shim from my pocket. 3 seconds of focused pressure. A dry metallic click.
The door gave way.
I stepped inside and found the heavy oak cabinet in the corner, a piece of furniture my father had built in his garage. Underneath it, my knuckles hit cardboard. I pulled out a battered shoebox. Inside was a stack of papers. The logo was familiar. The insurance company my father had paid into for 20 years of his life. I flipped through the pages.
Sole beneficiari, Claire Hilt.
My father had made sure I was looked after. But the ledger told a different story. The withdrawals started 5 years ago, right after I deployed. While I was eating gray meat out of a foil pouch and listening for incoming mortars, Warren was at a bank branch on Main Street, bleeding my father's legacy dry. 1,000 here, 5,000 there, a massive chunk right before he bought that truck. Then I saw the second knife. The blow that actually drew blood. On the bottom of the third withdrawal authorization, on the signature line, it wasn't Warren's blocky, jagged scroll. It was a series of elegant slanted loops. Perfect cursive. Diane Holt Kendrick. My mother. Her signature didn't shake. There were no hesitation marks. She hadn't been forced. She had signed my future away with the same hand that used to hold mine when I was afraid of the dark. She had watched me pack my bags for a war zone, kiss my cheek, and then gone to the bank to help a parasite spend my blood money. I didn't scream. I didn't tear the pages. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, every signature, every date. Then I placed the papers back in their original creases, slid the box under the cabinet, and matched the faint tracks in the dust exactly. No evidence of intrusion. The prey had seen the trap, and they didn't know it yet. I was still standing on the lawn of the house my father built when the headlights hit me. A pair of bright xenon beams cut through the blackness of the storm. A heavy black Lincoln Town car sliced through the flooded gutter of Cedarwood Lane, its tires throwing up a wall of dirty slush as it screeched to a halt at the edge of the driveway. The rear passenger window rolled down exactly 2 inches. Silver hair. A slash of deep blood-red lipstick. Vivian Holt, 73 years old, carved out of cold Atlantic granite.
She didn't look at me first.
Her gaze was a laser locking onto the twitch of the living room curtains where Warren was peering out from the dark. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. She just smiled, a sharp, clinical expression that promised nothing but pain.
"Pick up the girl," she said.
I was deposited into the back seat like a piece of salvaged cargo. The door thudded shut with a heavy, pressurized seal that silenced the storm instantly. The interior was thick with the scent of expensive almond lotion and warm, climate-controlled air. My feet were bare and caked in black mud. My toes were raw. I was shivering so hard my teeth felt like they'd shatter. Vivian didn't offer a hug. She just tossed a heavy white cotton towel at my head. 14 years, she said, her eyes never leaving the house as the Lincoln pulled away. I've spent 14 years waiting for that man to make a mistake this monumentally stupid. I've spent 14 years waiting for the legal right to rip you out of that cage, Claire. He took everything, I whispered. The insurance. The house. Everything. He took nothing but a loan he can't repay. Her voice was as sharp as a bayonet. Dry yourself off. We have work to do. We didn't go to a hospital. We went to the 7th-floor suite of the Regency Hotel. Vivian marched to the glass-top desk, reached into a leather briefcase, and slammed a gold-trimmed manila folder onto the surface. The sound cracked through the silent room like a gunshot.
"Sit," she ordered.
She tapped the folder. Your father knew exactly what kind of woman your mother was. He didn't leave her the deed. He put this property into the Holt family trust. She flipped a page. Your mother was a tenant with one ironclad condition for her residency. She was never to engage in any conduct that endangered the primary beneficiary. That's you, Claire. Tonight, she locked a combat veteran out of the family home in a Category 4 hurricane. She didn't just lock the door. She signed her own eviction notice. I felt the warmth of the room finally reaching my marrow. Warren is a thief. Diane is a coward. Vivian leaned over the desk until her face was inches from mine. They think the Holt legacy is something they can sell off for parts. They are about to find out that this family has very long memories and very sharp teeth. She straightened up. I have the money to bury them in court for a decade. I have the lawyers. But I'm not going to lead this charge, Claire. Her eyes locked onto mine. I want you to lead the counteroffensive. I want you to be the one who hands them the boxes. I looked at the folder. I looked at the bloodstain on my foot from the cold stone porch. The girl who had begged for her mother's help was gone, drowned in the mud of Cedarwood Lane. The captain was back. Roger that, I said. The air in Attorney Callahan's office smelled like expensive coffee and fresh toner. It smelled like the law. He didn't waste time. He slid 3 folders across his mahogany desk. Folder 1, he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. The Holt Family Trust. Your father built a fortress around that property. It stays with you. Period. He tapped the second file. The insurance records. Warren and your mother bled that account nearly dry while you were overseas. We can sue for it, and we will. Then he reached for the third folder. Thinner than the others. It bore the logo of a local credit union. Warren isn't just a parasite, Claire. He's an idiot. He flipped the folder open. A mortgage application. Warren had tried to pull a $35,000 home equity loan on the Cedarwood Lane property, listing himself as the primary owner. He needed to pay off a gambling debt. Callahan slid a magnifying glass across the desk. Look at the signature line. Bottom right. I leaned forward. I knew my mother's handwriting, soft, slanted loops, a script that always seemed to be apologizing for taking up space. But this was different. The ink was pressed deep, the lines rigid and jagged. A calculated, stiff imitation.
That's not her, I said.
Not even close. Roy forged your mother's name to secure a loan on a property he didn't own, Callahan said, leaning back. In this state, that's not just a family squabble. That's mortgage fraud. Identity theft. A Class C felony. The silence in the office was absolute. You have 2 buttons on this desk, Captain. Button 1, civil court. We evict them, sue for the insurance money, take the truck and the tools, and leave them on the curb with a couple of suitcases.
Clean. Fast.
But Warren stays a free man. He paused. Button 2. We take folder 3 to the district attorney.
The forgery.
The fraud against a federal credit union. Warren doesn't go to a motel. He goes to a cell for the next 5 years minimum. I looked at the forged signature. For 16 years, I had been the one under the heel, hiding in a wardrobe, winding a broken watch to keep from screaming. Now, I was the one holding the hammer. My phone began to vibrate on the desk. One name, pulsing in the dim light.
Mom.
I let it ring. I let the vibration fill the room until it died into silence. Then I looked at Callahan and reached for the 3rd folder. Let's talk about button 2. I chose a diner 20 miles outside of town. I sat in a corner booth, back against the wall, eyes on the front door. Diane walked in 10 minutes late. She looked like she was being hunted, beige trench coat buttoned to the chin, eyes darting between tables like she expected an ambush. She slid into the seat across from me and didn't take off her coat. Didn't ask if I'd caught a fever from standing barefoot in a hurricane while she watched from the dry side of the glass. The first thing out of her mouth wasn't an apology. Warren is a wreck, she said, her voice a thin, shaky rasp. He's losing his mind over the eviction notice. What are you doing, Claire? You're tearing this family apart. I reached into my jacket and slid the forged mortgage application across the table. He forged your name, Mom. He used the house my father built as collateral for a loan he had no right to take. He stole my identity, and then he stole yours. Did you know? She looked at the paper.
She didn't gasp.
She didn't act surprised. She knew. She had always known. He said it was an investment for our future, she whispered. He said once he got the new contracts, he'd pay it all back. By stealing from me, I said. The disgust rose in my throat like silt. By risking your credit, your home, your life. She reached out, her fingers trembling, trying to grab my wrist. I pulled back. Sharp. Automatic. You have your army salary, she hissed, the desperation twisting into something ugly. If you kick him out, I have nothing.
I don't have a job.
I don't have anywhere to go. You're my daughter. You're supposed to take care of me. I leaned forward until my face was inches from hers. I was your daughter on Cedarwood Lane, too, I said. My words were low, aimed straight at her heart. I was your daughter when the wind was ripping the trees out of the ground. I was your daughter when Warren turned that deadbolt. You watched. You chose him. Why? She stood up fast, her chair nearly tipping. The mask fell away, leaving nothing but a bitter, hollow woman who had traded her soul for the comfort of a lie. Because he's my husband, she snapped, loud enough to turn heads. And you? You're just like your father.
Stubborn. Arrogant.
Ungrateful. Nathan thought he was better than everyone too, and he ended up alone in the dirt. She turned on her heels and marched out the door, without looking back. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat. I pulled my father's pocket watch from my pocket and held it against my ear.
Click, click, click.
The last thread had been cut. The enemy had fired their final shot, and it was a dud. I know a lot of you listening have a Diane in your life. Someone who demands your loyalty while handing you to the wolves. If you've ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to save your own life, drop a 0 in the comments. I want to know I'm not standing here alone. I pressed dial on Callahan's number. He picked up on the first ring.
Callahan, I said.
My voice was as cold as the steel in my father's old garage. The peace talks are over. Send the filings to the court. Send the evidence to the DA. I hung up, dropped a $5 bill on the table, and walked out into the cold. The storm was over. The landslide was just beginning. Thursday morning, 7 a.m. Sheriff's Deputy Davis didn't smile. He walked straight to the front door and slapped a bright orange eviction notice onto the wood, right over the spot where the paint was still peeling. 10 seconds later, the door ripped open. Warren stood there in his undershirt, clutching the orange paper like a live snake. He didn't see us. He sprinted back inside, then tore down the driveway in his F-150, tires screaming, heading straight downtown. 15 minutes later, he was at the Regency Hotel, pounding on the door of Suite 714 until his knuckles turned white. The door swung open. He stumbled in, gasping, pointing a shaking finger at Vivian, who was sitting at the glass desk, a cup of black coffee in front of her, looking exactly like a judge waiting for a guilty plea. "You can't do this," he roared. "I've lived in that house for 16 years. I fixed the hot water heater. I replaced the roof. I paid the property taxes. Under the law, I have rights. I'll sue you into the dirt." Vivian took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. She set the cup down with a soft, clinical clink. "You paid those taxes with the insurance money you stole from my granddaughter," she said. Her voice was a low, frozen rasp. "You don't have rights, Warren. You have a ledger of debt you can never settle." She stood, crossed the room, and slammed the original deed, the one my father had signed before the military sent him home in a box, into Warren's chest with a force that made him stagger back. "That is the deed. It bears the Holt name, not yours. You mortgaged the property with a forged signature. That is a Class C felony. You have 14 days to pack your garbage and vanish. If I see your truck on that driveway on the 15th day, this deed goes to the district attorney along with the loan officer's signed statement. You won't be looking for a new house. You'll be looking for a lawyer who can handle a 5-year sentence." Warren's face went from red to a sickly, translucent white. He looked at the deed. He looked at me, standing in the corner shadows. And for the first time in my life, I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't the man of the house anymore. He was a con man who had run out of lies. He turned and practically ran for the door. Monday morning.
Courtroom B.
Fluorescent lights. Industrial floor wax. The hum of a clock on the wall. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my Class A uniform. Every button polished to a mirror finish. Every crease sharp enough to draw blood. On my left wrist, my father's pocket watch. A witness. Across the aisle, Warren sat slumped in a cheap off-the-rack suit, staring at the defense table. Beside him, Diane looked like she'd aged a decade in a week. Swollen eyes. Frayed sweater. A damp tissue she kept pressing to her face. Callahan stood at the podium and presented everything. The trust. The bank records. The forged mortgage application. And then, last, "Your Honor, I have a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Patricia Vance, the next-door neighbor. On the night of the storm, Diane Holt Kendrick knowingly and purposefully locked her daughter, a combat veteran, out of the family home during a Category 4 hurricane. She watched from the window as her daughter stood barefoot in the mud. She chose to lock the deadbolt to protect Warren Kendrick's comfort over her daughter's life. She didn't just lock the door. She signed her own eviction notice." Diane let out a loud, shuddering sob and buried her face in her hands. I looked at the side of her head. I felt nothing.
No anger. No pity.
Just the cold, clinical satisfaction of a mission reaching its objective. Judge Harmon took the papers. He flipped through them. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock. 4 minutes. That was all it took for 16 years of lies to evaporate under the weight of the truth. The motion for a stay of execution is denied. His voice echoed through the chamber. "The eviction order is effective immediately. Mr. Kendrick, you and your wife have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Do not return." The gavel came down. Crack. I stood up. I didn't smirk. I didn't celebrate. I just adjusted my father's watch and walked out of that courtroom, my heels clicking a steady victory march on the hard floor. Outside, the sky was a pale, clear blue. The fortress had been reclaimed. The screech of packing tape was the only sound on Cedarwood Lane that afternoon. Warren was lugging cardboard boxes to the back of a rented truck, face a dark shade of bruised purple, sweating through a gray t-shirt. He tossed a box in with a hollow thud. 16 years of squatting, and this was all he had to show for it, a pile of cardboard and a rented engine. I stood across the yard, leaning against the old oak tree, arms crossed. I didn't say a word. I watched the neighbors behind their lace curtains. The same people who had brought him casseroles while I was sleeping in a motel. Now they were as silent as graves. Not one of them came out to help him lift a box. Callahan had called the night before with the final numbers. Because of the fraud, Warren's wages were being garnished for the next 7 years. He was going to work himself to the bone just to pay back the money he'd bled for my father's life insurance. He wasn't just leaving my house. He was entering a prison made of debt. Diane appeared in the doorway, clutching a small taped box. She walked slowly down the steps and stopped directly in front of me. She looked at the silver bars on my shoulders, then up at my face, searching for a crack, a sliver of the little girl who used to beg for her approval. She didn't find it. "Your father would be so proud of you, Claire," she said.
Thin. Hollow.
A weaponized compliment. I looked her straight in the eye. My heartbeat didn't skip. "My father's been proud of me for a long time," I said. "He was proud when I graduated. He was proud when I earned my commission. He didn't need to see you lose everything to know who I am. He already knew." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Then she turned, climbed into the passenger seat of Warren's truck, and the engine sputtered to life, coughing out a cloud of acrid exhaust. He shoved it into gear and pulled away. I watched the taillights disappear around the corner. The street fell into a heavy, expectant silence. The perimeter was secure. I didn't wear the uniform the next morning. I wore an olive drab undershirt, faded jeans, and leatherwork gloves that had seen 3 deployments. In front of me sat a 5-gallon bucket of harbor blue paint.
Deep. Dark.
The exact shade my father had used when he built this fence 25 years ago. I dipped the brush and dragged the first stroke across the top rail. The blue was thick. It swallowed Warren's white in one pass, burying his maintenance under a layer of reality. Each stroke was a tactical maneuver. I scraped away the peeling flakes of his failure, let them fall into the dirt like dead skin. You don't talk your way out of a betrayal. You work your way out. You build something better over the ruins of the old. The neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Patricia, appeared on the sidewalk with a glass pitcher of lemonade. She set it on the fence post without ceremony. "Your father spent 3 weeks on that fence," she said softly. "He used a level on every single slat." She patted the wood. "He'd be glad to see the harbor blue back where it belongs." She walked back to her house without waiting for a thank you. I took a sip.
Taut. Sharp. Real.
Night fell over Cedarwood Lane, bringing a cool breeze from the bay. I sat on the top step of the porch, my back against the door that Diane had locked against me. The house was dark behind me, but for the first time in 16 years, the darkness didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a rest. I pulled my father's pocket watch from my pocket and laid it on the wooden step. The glass was still cracked, a jagged map of the night I'd almost given up. But the sound was perfect.
Tick, tick, tick.
The heartbeat of the house. The pulse of a legacy that had not been broken, only delayed. I looked out at the street. The harbor blue fence was a shadow in the moonlight, a dark, solid line marking where the world ended and my life began. Warren and Diane were gone, drifting toward whatever cheap fate they'd chosen for themselves. They had fired their shots and missed. I reached out and touched the fresh, dry paint on the doorframe. My hands were steady. My eyes were clear. I was not a victim. I was not a survivor. I was the sentry. And I was finally on my post.